Welcome to A Christian Response with me, Dave Piper, on TWR-UK. In this series, we're taking a look at how Christians are responding to some of the major issues in communities across the UK and around the world. We're finding out what motivates people to stand up for those in poverty, to tackle human trafficking, and to champion those in the latter years of their lives, amongst many other issues. We're speaking to church leaders, charity staff, experts and volunteers to get a grasp of the numerous problems in our communities that can be fixed by prayer, practical action and political intervention. We're taking lessons from Scripture about how we as followers of Christ should respond to those around us. If you'd like to get in touch to share your thoughts on anything you hear this week on the programme, then please do feel free to email us. The email address is studio@twr.org.uk. That's studio@twr.org.uk. This week we're taking a look at community and our neighbourhoods and a Christian response to our neighbourhoods. And we're joined by Rebekah Brettle, the founder and CEO of Houses of Light, which was formerly known as the Neighbourhood Prayer Network. Rebekah, I wonder what your thoughts are as we start to talk about neighbourhoods and community, as to why, to Christians, neighbourhoods actually matter.
Well, I think that we all live in streets with people, and that, everywhere we live, we've got people from all around the world. We've got people from all walks of life, and every single problem that is facing this nation is happening on a street level. So even if there was, say, a flooding in one part of the country, there is probably going to be somebody who knows somebody in that area of the country living on your street or has a connection with it. So I think that personally, I don't think there's any way better or anywhere better to start than your street, because nobody can tell you that you can't speak to your neighbour about Jesus. Nobody can tell you, in our case, we've got a cross up in our window. We're privileged in this country that we're able to do that, but I can put a cross in my window and no one can tell me that I can't do that. Now, if you're in a workplace, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult with work-based politics, but, just living your life and literally being a light that shines. Jesus says in Matthew 5, verse 13 to 16, that we are the light of the world, so we need to be a light that shines in our street. So I think it's the only way to be sure of reaching everybody.
And does this in many ways reflect the practices of Jesus and the disciples, the early church as well? Because they weren't called to just up sticks and move to their own little ghetto where they were away from everyone else who didn't believe what they believed.
Yeah, I mean, the early stages of Jesus' ministry was in, I always get the name slightly wrong. I think it's Capernaum, isn't it? But, a lot of the initial part of Jesus' ministry was actually in the hometown of Capernaum. And it was actually meeting in houses, like the miracle of the gentleman who was put through the roof happened in someone's house. They made a hole in someone's roof, didn't they? And often Jesus would say, let me come and eat at your home. And people would say, this Zacchaeus, the short guy, because I'm really short, I like that story. Jesus said, I want to meet in your home. So there's a lot of ministry that happened in homes. Peter's mother-in-law had a fever, and Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law in the home. He wasn't on the street necessarily. So I think that, I think that in the early church as well, we look at Acts 2. It talks about how the early Christians devoted themselves to the teachings and to the breaking of bread, and they met in people's homes, giving it to each other as they had need. The early church was actually in homes. And again, if you look at Paul, he actually preached from a home. So I think homes are a massive key to, that's where you share food, that's where you share relationship, that's where life happens, isn't it? Everything that we go through, where we sleep, where we eat, what we watch on TV, entertainment, it all happens in homes. So yeah, I would say it's a significant part of our faith, actually, what happens in our homes.
And we do keep hearing, don't we, reports of how few of us know our neighbours, how few of us talk to anyone in our neighbourhood, in our community, on a weekly basis or a daily basis. Do you think there's potentially a link between the fact that we are becoming more isolated on our streets and the fact that the nation itself feels to many people a more dangerous place to be?
I think it is, and I'll give you an example on my own street. When I first moved into my street, I'll be honest, I moved to Wales because I felt that was the best thing for my son and for my husband. My husband's Welsh. I'm from Manchester, and I really was homesick for Manchester, and it felt quite a strange place. And then over time, we started to get to know one of our neighbours, and now it feels really safe because I know where he lives and he knows where we live, and we're actually become such good friends. He's almost like part of a family, to be honest. But last year, I went and knocked on 72 homes. We gave him a little Christmas card, we gave him a little bag of chocolate and a can of Coke and an invitation to our home and an invitation to get to actually take part in a charitable activity. We were basically trying to fill some boxes for some kids in care who have left the care system but have not yet transitioned into living independently. And you know what? I had 16 people who I didn't know in my home. They were lovely people. The conversations I had on the door, they were so lovely. And I remember thinking, most people, the vast majority of them, they're good people. But I think we watch the news and we hear these horror stories on the news. And I think it really does make us think, oh, everyone's dangerous. And I think we have to be sensible. I do think we have to be very careful. I think I've got a child. I'm not going to let my child go into neighbours' homes without me. I think we have to be sensible. We have to be wise. But I do think that the vast majority of people that I've met on my street are lovely, and it's made me feel really happy to live where I live. And it feels like I'm living in a much safer place just because I've met these people.
And of course, there's things that people of all faiths and none can do to make their street, make their community feel more like community, to get to know people, build relationships. But you yourselves are Houses of Light, formerly the Neighbourhood Prayer Network, with that very distinctive Christian angle on all of this. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how that ministry got started.
Well, it's a bit of a complicated story. So I'll start right back when I was 8 or 9. I'm actually 47 now, so we're going back quite a few years. But I was actually living in Crumpsall. Many of you will be aware of the synagogue attack that took place in Crumpsall. My street was actually where I grew up, a street away from that. I grew up living with Muslims on one side, Jewish people on the other side. Very, very mixed area. But when I was 8 or 9, I remember looking out of a window and thinking, oh my gosh, there is such little community here. This is an 8-year-old child way of thinking. I was looking at the odd light in some houses. There's very few cars in those days, where I lived anyway. And you really could be forgiven for thinking that it was a ghost town. People were just not interacting. And I remember thinking, my grandma, her name's she's passed away a few years ago now, but Edna Clapham, she used to say strange things to me like, oh, I really miss the war. And I was like, Grandma, why do you miss the war? Oh, no, I don't miss the fighting, but I do miss the community. She said that in the wartime, there was this wartime community spirit that was there where people used to help each other out. If you needed sugar, you'd just go to your neighbour and ask for it. And, everyone knew everybody and it felt safer. So she was lamenting the loss of that community. And this was in the 80s. And I think it's in many respects with social media, with us all being virtual these days, I think it's even worse today. But I remember literally looking out of the window and thinking, oh, my grandma's right. And I heard this kind of like, I wouldn't say it's an audible voice, but just this deep sense that God was speaking to me, which as an adult now who understands theology a bit more, I understand that was the Holy Spirit whispering to me, saying, I'm going to use you in the future to change this. So after all, by the time I was 14, for various reasons that I don't fully understand myself, I did become an atheist for 5 years. And then I eventually came back to God, which is another story. You'd have to take up the whole program for that story. But when I did come back to God, not long after an Alpha course in 2004, where I really knew that Jesus had died for me, I remember God reminding me of this moment when I was 8 or 9. And I got really excited where I kept seeing houses everywhere in my mind. And I just felt, that God wants everyone to know about him. So I suppose that was the first thing. And I thought, if you're going to do anything, there's no point doing anything in Christianity without prayer. Any project that we do is pointless unless you're doing it in prayer. So I thought, let's get every street prayed for. And I've always intended it to be an avenue for genuinely loving people, genuinely bringing people back into community. But actually, our true community is with God. So the ministry of what is now Houses of Light, that was Neighbourhood Prayer Network, was to pray for your neighbour, care for your neighbour, share Jesus with your neighbour. And I think we launched on the 29th of September in 2012 at the National Day of Prayer and Worship in Wembley Stadium. I'm not massively a fan of public speaking, but somehow God got me through that 2 minutes. Don't remember much about it except that I couldn't have done it without God. People started signing up from that. I wasn't expecting anyone to sign. Well, I expected a few people to sign up, but within a day we had 500 people. We were shocked, and then it just grew from there. So I can't say that everyone who signed up all those years ago are the same people praying for their neighbours on the streets now. But over time, people have moved and things like that. But we do know that because we keep getting stories coming in. We do know that people are doing this. So in late last year, though, we just felt we had to pause because we felt God had something new to say to us. So we actually went into a deep time of prayer, and we really felt that 2025 was the year of reset. And part of that reset was to change our name to more, because we felt God was really calling us to be more visible. I think in the previous few years, we've kind of been a bit hidden. And I think we've encouraged people in a respect to kind of be a little bit hidden, just to pray silently behind doors and as people ask questions, answer questions about faith, but, love your neighbour as the scriptures tell us to. But in more recent times, we feel that God's calling us to be more visible, not just us, but all Christians everywhere. And so Houses of Light was born so that we can be a light in dark places. We can be a light in the difficulties that people are facing on the streets. And we can only do that by praying. That's the priority. You have to pray. That's the foundation. Caring, that's the two greatest commandments. Love God, love people. And then I believe if you love people, you will share Jesus with them. I don't think there's any greater gift you can give your neighbour than knowing that Jesus loves them the way that he does. So that's in a nutshell was.
And it's really interesting getting people to sign up and join in and be part of it, because you could argue, couldn't you, that all of us, if we're living our lives properly for Christ, we ought to be loving our neighbour, we ought to be praying for our street. Is it important, though, to have that encouragement of knowing not just that there are some other people doing it out there, but even the details of which streets are being covered in prayer?
I think it is, because I think it's strategic. I think that, because one of the things we have noticed, because we've got a little map on our website, there are areas, some of it because it's farmland, because of course people don't live on farmland, but there's definitely areas where this has taken off more and areas where it hasn't. And that if people are looking at that, those who are perhaps more strategic in Christian thinkers, maybe those are the places that need a little bit more mission into them. So I think there is something in that. But there's a massive confidence, I think, that comes from knowing that there are other Christians in your area. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of us go to our churches and obviously we see our Christian friends from church there. But we don't always recognise when we're in workplaces where it can sometimes feel like we're the only Christian, that there are so many other people out there. Most of us can feel quite isolated, and some more than others. There will be people here who work in a workplace where there's tons of Christians. I work in the NHS, and actually faith is not a massive part of conversation at work. So sometimes knowing that there are other people out there, it just fills us with a bit more confidence to keep going. And I think there's power in that as well, of knowing that you're together, that you're all doing something together. And one of the things that does happen is when people share their stories. I was on a call a couple of weeks ago with one of the activists in our network. This is a grandma who I thought I was bold. She basically decides to pray to God that she can bless a family. She knocks on the doors and she says to God before she goes out, I don't want to leave these homes before I bless the whole family. And she stands at the door, calls the whole family to the door and prays a blessing over them. And I'm like, wow. And this is someone, who's a lot older than me. Another lady who was of a similar age literally has given out prayer request cards twice a year to the people on her street. People started coming to the church, and now that has caught the imagination of her church. So they've been doing it in a significant area of Blackpool. And this is like somebody who's a lot older with some health issues. I've been blown away actually by some of these stories, and they do encourage you, because in light of that, that's making me be a little bit more bold this year on my street, what I'm going to do. So I think that there's massive encouragement. There's a scripture, isn't there? Iron sharpens iron. And I think sometimes we just need the encouragement to keep going sometimes.
And it's interesting, Rebekah, to hear about that church catching the vision from that one person's work, because we can do things on our own, can't we, or as part of a parachurch group. But surely God's plan is for us to be in that fellowship, in that local church, and all of us catching vision from each other in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I do believe in the church gathered and the church scattered. So I think a lot of our Sunday meetings, or actually there are now churches meeting on other days of the week as well, and that's to be welcomed. But I think often that is like the gathering of church is the place to get enthusiastic, is a place to be fed, is a place to get encouragement, is a place to get prayer, is a place to be discipled. But actually, we don't spend most of our time in church. We actually spend most of our time living on a street, working in our workplaces, going to schools, shopping in shopping centres. So I think that what Houses of Light really represents, if I'm honest, is when Jesus came to earth in the incarnation of a human being, we as Christians, I believe, are meant to be, I think in the Message version of the Bible, it says Jesus moved into the neighbourhood. And I think that, actually we are to be that salt and light of Jesus in our neighbourhood, living different lives and being a magnet for people in the community who will never set foot, in many cases, over the threshold of a church, but they will meet us and they will see something different in us if we're genuinely followers of Jesus, not just a decision, but we are a disciple where we're actually following Jesus' teachings. They'll see something different about us, they'll ask for questions, and that's the place where we're going to meet people and people will get to know Jesus.
And we're aware that there's various things that happen in church calendars in all denominations, things like Christmas and Easter, of course, but other seasonal things as well. Is that something we can latch on to when we're looking at being salt and light in our community? Can we almost build in different events, as it were, throughout the year for prayer, for reaching out to our neighbours?
Well, I think so. We actually have a menu of ideas on our website. Our website's housesoflight.net. And if you go to, you can click on prayer or care or share, and there's a little menu of what you can do across the whole year. So we do try to follow what's going on in the Christian calendar. But equally, so for example, if it's like the big lunch, which is a secular event, we would encourage our members, look, why not? Why not do a big lunch in your house, in your park? If you want to do it bigger or smaller, it's up to you. But join in with something that's already happening. When it's Easter, of course, you want people to be inviting their neighbours to the Easter services. The same with Christmas, if there's carol concerts. And Chris singles are very, very popular with non-Christians. They love the candlelight carols. So you can invite people into things that are already happening. But, for example, in September, there's the Macmillan Coffee Mornings. So we would encourage our members to use what is already there, do a Macmillan Coffee Morning, either in your own home, or if one of your neighbours or a business locally is putting one on, join in with that so that you can meet other neighbours, so that you are part of what's already going on. So I don't think a lot of what we do is about reinventing the wheel. I think it's actually harnessing what is there and kind of like just doing it with a focus on getting to know neighbours, loving neighbours, praying for neighbours. When it's election time, for example, we say to our members who sign up to our newsletter, do you know what? Even if you don't like a politician that's just been elected, write them a congratulations letter. Politicians get such a lot of abuse. Wouldn't it be amazing if every Christian in the country would when their MP or councillor gets elected, whether they like them or not or what they stand for, sent them a thank you letter and I want you to know I'm praying for you. What a witness that would be when all these politicians are getting his online abuse all the time. So we do try to, what we're trying to do in Houses of Light is we're trying to funnel anything that's going on nationally to a street level, because actually that's where we all are. And sometimes there are bigger initiatives happening and we can feel a bit helpless, like, what can I do? But everybody can do something, just something small on their street. And one of our biggest things is about loneliness. So, for example, we would encourage people to look out for those people on the street who have nobody going to visit them. You just don't ever see them leave the home. We would again encourage two people together, not just do it on your own. We would encourage you to befriend that person. And we have a testimony from one of our former trustees. She's not a former trustee because she doesn't like us anymore, but she did her term with us, and her name was Jean Dobson. She was one of the first people to literally get to know her lonely neighbour, and they became like family. And yes, at the end of her life, because sadly this lady that they befriended did eventually pass away, just before she died, she broke bread with her neighbours and she gave her life to Jesus. So, I think it's very practical, but ultimately we shouldn't, as Christians, be in a place where we've got someone on our streets where nobody is spending any time with that person. I don't think God's happy about that. I don't think we should be happy about that. And there's a massive opportunity for all of us to reach out to the most lonely in society.
And ultimately, is it fair to say that this is really taking a look at fixing society in the same way that God looks to fix society? Because salvation comes to us as individuals. It's our walk with Jesus on a personal level, isn't it? And this sounds to me very similar, of breaking it down to really local.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that I honestly, I'll give you another example. If you look on our website again, there's like a map, and you can put in this. We've linked it to the Police UK website. Police UK website, you can literally put in your postcode, and you can pray. You can see every crime that they're not going to tell you what exactly happened, but the rough label of what that crime was on your street. Now, we were at one of our conferences years ago, and we thought, Rachel's one of our volunteers, Rachel Fowler Tawo, and let's plug in her street to see what crimes are on her street. And it was a really bad example because she'd been praying for the area. There was hardly any crime at all. And it was a testimony actually that she had been praying. We have quite a number of people who have said that as they have prayed for their street, the crime has gone down. It's very hard to prove, but you can look at that website and stuff. So I think that, the crimes do happen on your street, and I can't pray for knife crime across the whole of the nation and believe that it's going to end tomorrow. I'm sorry, but I don't have that faith. But I do have faith that there won't be a knife crime on my street if I pray for it. So everything you can think of, whether that's human trafficking, which is happening on streets in plain view, and actually human trafficking is happening in our streets under our noses because we don't know our neighbours. That would not be able to happen if we did know our neighbours. But basically, yes, I do believe that if people, in answer to your original question, if people are following the teachings of Jesus, if they are genuinely praying with love, not with their own agenda, but genuinely asking for God's kingdom to come on their street as it is in heaven, I do believe that is a massive vehicle for societal transformation. And actually, I think that we've proven over the last few years, throwing money at problems doesn't always work. But I think if we can if each of us do our little bit on our own in our corner of wherever we're living, I think that adds up. So can you imagine if every Christian took it upon themselves to take spiritual responsibility for their street, and they were really genuinely seeking to see God's kingdom on their street? I think we could transform this nation overnight. I genuinely believe that.
Rebekah, I love that idea of us taking spiritual responsibility for our street, because we can often see our mission being to speak, to go out, to reach out, to be salt and light. And yet that is so true, isn't it? That, yes, God has put church leaders in positions of responsibility for their flock, but Equally, he's given us responsibility, at the very least, surely, for praying for where we live.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that, as I said before, I think the church is wonderful. I love the local church in all its different colours and fabrics, and but of a whole variety of Christian denominations. I don't believe any one denomination has got it perfectly right, but I think if you put us all together, but we can't be everywhere. The church leader can't be in the community, but the people that attend that church can. And I think that, can you imagine the power of everybody sharing God's love with those who are rejected and those who are, struggling with things. There's a story. I went to another church who were not actually, in fairness, this was somebody who was not connected with us, but actually somebody on a street, a Christian someone was giving a testimony about how they had an alcohol problem, and their Christian neighbour, this was part of their testimony in the church, had gone round even when they were drunk, and they'd prayed for them, they'd stuck with them, and that person's sober now, and is now following Jesus. But it takes some guts sometimes to reach out to people who are very, very different from ourselves. And not always, it's not always comfortable, is it, to meet up with people who are living lifestyles that are very different. But sometimes we are the only people, we are the only Christians that they may ever meet. And sometimes it's not even about speaking, is it? Sometimes actions speak louder than words. I love that phrase. Someone once said, you may be the only Bible that someone reads. So, we are representatives, we are ambassadors on our street. Or as Lisa, who I think Lisa Hutt would say, we are the first responders sometimes on our streets to some people who are in trouble. So yeah.
Rebekah, just finally, how can we find out more about Houses of Light and potentially even sign up ourselves to be part of it?
So housesoflight.net, www.housesoflight.net, that's the website, which we've just been revamping over the last few months. And if you sign up, you will get a newsletter every Friday. There is a WhatsApp group, but that WhatsApp group you're not automatically added to. It's a double opt-in, so we invite you to it once you decide you want to be part of it. And the reason we do that is we do respect the privacy of our members, so that's we do like to keep that nice for you. If you sign up to us, the newsletters themselves, what we do for every Friday, we have a little prayer request, a little suggestion of how you can reach out to your neighbours, even some suggestions of how you might share faith. So, for example, I think 2 weeks ago we said, ask your neighbour if they've ever seen God's Not Dead 2 or God's Not Dead, the movie, because actually people like movies. And it's a great talking point, they can watch it and then you can have a chat about it. So we're looking for things that everybody can do, not just for evangelists or the intercessors or the pastoral people among us. We're looking for something that we can all do. So we do give you a little guidance if you want it. We also produce lots of resources, which we do for free as online guides. So last year we did Through the Lens of Your Street, a 40-day prayer guide. Again, we usually combine that with actions. So we do have a lot of resources for you. We've got prayer request cards, prints as well, that you can take that design and print it locally. And then obviously we love to hear your ideas. So if you've got any ideas and you think you can do things better, we listen to our members and we do actually consider them and we try and put those into action too.
Rebekah Brettle from Houses of Light, thank you for joining us this week.
Thank you.
And that's all we got time for on this week's episode of A Christian Response. I'm Dave Piper, and it's been a pleasure to have your company over the past half hour as we've taken a closer look at how Christians are responding and can respond to the major issues in life, whether that's in our own towns and cities, across the nations of the UK, or even reaching out into the wider world. If you'd like to get in touch to share your thoughts on the issues we're discussing, then please do feel free to email. The email address is studio@twr.org.uk. That's studio@twr.org.uk. And you can stream or download this week's episode now in full at the website. Just go to twr.org.uk/on-demand and search for A Christian Response.
This podcast is a production of Transworld Radio UK. For more information, go to our website at twr.org.uk.